There
Got
we
there in
go.
the end, man.
Mr. Drybreak, you told me you were just wearing a white t-shirt. You clearly
Oh
got a
yeah,
hat
but I'm
on.
naked from the waist down, so it's fine.
It's all right. I'm naked from the chest down. I've just lent a bit of cloth over down to the nipple.
Jesus. Sorry about that. It's been over a year since I've posted on Instagram, yet alone updated the app. So yeah, it's very smooth.
It's all good. I've just spent 15 minutes. It's a bit like, you'll know this, being a comedian yourself. It's like when an act don't show up and you're meant to be doing 10. You've planned to do 10 and you've got your 10 spots solid. And then they go, do you reckon you could do 2025? And you're just going, shit! And then you're just like infilling crap.
I'm the guy
That's
who's
how I
like
felt
stuck
then.
on the M6 trying to make it to the next spot. Yeah, I apologise
Yeah.
for the people who've joined us.
Posting a picture on Instagram, well, not on Instagram with you because you haven't updated it for years, but on socials, kicking a tyre just so the world knows indirectly. See, I am in trouble.
Oh man. Well, yeah. We've been talking about doing some stuff around ADHD for a while, and like that's kind of ongoing in the background. But this panorama thing was too big a thing not to sort of discuss publicly. And you've been sort of building up an audience about your sort of your ADHD journey, wanky term.
Yeah. What else do you call it though? Transition sounds like I'm going from one thing to another. I don't know what to call it. What is it?
Ill. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Can I just have your attention, please, family? I've just got something to tell you. As of today, I am officially mentally disabled. Thank you very much. Any questions? Please write them down. We'll return later.
So for the benefit of anyone who's sort of tuned in, I've been diagnosed just over a year, and suspected I had the ADHD long before that, but on topic, it took a while to get assessed, and you are really recently diagnosed.
Yeah. Absolutely, and some context here. So myself and Mike have probably known each other the best part of 10 years. And we knew each other from the comedy circuit. I used to run gigs. Mike was a fresh comic coming out, smashed some open spots, and gradually we just built a friendship. And it kind of, that I didn't say that friendship dwindled, but circumstantially we kind of went on our different paths for a while. And then randomly, I can't even remember what brought us back together, but it started with a conversation where we were chatting, and it was, you sent me a set that you'd done at a gig, and it was the first time you'd covered anything on a level of personal of ADHD for yourself. And it was just prior to that I'd, after years of kind of going through what felt like gaslighting by a GP, not being listened to and being told something you don't feel, discovering ADHD, and then you were going, just to let you know, I was diagnosed. I was like, tell me more.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, that's, of course, it's relevant to the whole panorama thing, is that it can be a battle. And like, I don't want to be someone who comes on here and like vilifies GPs, because they're really overstretched, under-resourced, and they are exactly what their title suggests. They are general. They cover. They don't specialize
general
in
practitioner.
anything. So it's you when you think about it in that context, you can't expect them to give you like a fully sort of qualified diagnosis on something like this, because it has to be done by someone that's more sort of specialized.
Absolutely, and I think that it's that situation, isn't it, where you can't get to the answer that you're looking for, or the person you're trying to get to. Unfortunately, it's the person at the end of the phone that gets it. If you're trying to make a complaint, and an innocent person answers the phone, they're going to get your frustrations, but they don't have the answers. And it's almost like that GP is getting the
Yeah,
brunt of
yeah,
a bigger
and in a
picture.
lot of cases, the GP can have their own sort of understanding of what ADHD is, but that could be based on something that they were taught years previously, and there's been so much sort of so many
Mm.
advances and sort of progresses, like with the with like real time like brain scans, like moving brain scans that show what parts of the brain they're sort of getting fired up during certain kinds of activities. It's becoming easier to sort of see.
The blood
Yeah,
flow
yeah, yeah.
within the
So
brain and where it's, yeah.
so I had a bit of resistance myself. Um, I attempted to go through Right to Choose and got some pushback, and I think that was because the GP wasn't fully aware that it was actually written into law, because I got a follow-up letter saying, oh, actually, yes, of course, you can go through this organization. But by then I'd already started going through their chosen partner that was associated with the NHS. And I ended up going through those guys because their waiting list was actually shorter than Psychiatry UK, which is rare, very,
Yeah,
very rare.
I, just for context, Right to Choose, it's something that's available to people in England. Whereas if they're not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, if they're not happy with the proposed wait time for them to receive treatment, and they can identify an approved partner with less of a waiting time, they can then go, I'd like to go via Right to Choose, and I'd like my procedure, treatment, whichever it be,
Yeah,
to be
so
via this channel.
Right to Choose was like written into law like pretty recently. I think it was like 2017. So basically, it's a way for people to get around inordinately long waiting times, and it's not just specifically to ADHD. It's focused on mental health. Now, by pure luck of the draw, I managed to get seen sooner, and I was prepared to wait to see Psychiatry UK because someone I know had been assessed by them, and the reason I wanted to talk to them is because they had existing relationships with the NHS sort of regional funding bodies. So because there's an existing relationship there, it's easier to get it applied in other areas. But if the relationship with that organization and your local sort of body isn't already existing, it can be harder to get through.
It's the unknown, isn't it? And it's that whole process thing. If they've got processes
Yeah.
that are aligned, it's much
So
easier for them to
So I saw a
elect
comment
them.
a second ago saying that what was this whole Panorama thing? So basically, a week or so ago, you told me about it, Paul. Basically, word got out that Panorama were going to do an episode on private ADHD clinics and their assessment. And there was a bit of literature out there, articles kind of indicating the sort of tone of the piece. And basically, the sort of headline was these three clinics say that I have ADHD, but I don't. That was pretty much the sort of summation of the headline.
It was, and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, we've got to remember that headlines are there to catch attention, and God, it certainly did. But I think I can speak for myself. It pulled in a negative response from me in relation to how it
Yeah,
made me
and
feel.
I mean, so you jumped on TikTok to say exactly that, and you've been really good at sort of
Yeah,
expressing how you felt about the sort of general stages you've been going through.
yeah. I think we're all on a bit of a learning thing, aren't we? And I think my knowledge at the minute is greater than it was 2 weeks ago, but not as good as it will be down the line, because I'm determined to fill myself with as much factual kind of knowledge as possible. But yeah, it's kind of it's helped. TikTok has helped. It's built me a little
Yeah.
community of people that I can relate to, and I think
Yeah.
that's where it started with me.
It's fine that people read the literature and they kind of express their kind of concern about how damaging it could be, but I think maybe that in some senses that's potentially a bit premature because we haven't seen it yet. So there's a sense of potentially getting worried over nothing, but it turns out there is some stuff there to maybe be a bit concerned about. So basically, it's a 30-minute show, and this journalist basically goes and gets assessed by someone at the NHS, which we'll go into later, and then he goes to see 3 separate private businesses who do private assessments, who offer this service as a way to get around the ridiculous waiting time. So like, depending on where you live, you could be waiting up to 5 years for an assessment, which is a travesty, basically. And in that episode, and this is purely for the benefit of anyone who didn't see it, the first clinic he spoke about was what was the name? It was Harley. Yeah. Okay.
Harley Street. Yeah.
That was quite a quick process. They didn't go into the same depth that the NHS appointment went into, but we've got more to say about that in a bit. And then the other ones were ADHD 360, and what was the third one? ADHD.
It's the one I struggled with. It was one in Glasgow. I think it was something like ADHD Global or UK or something like that. It was.
We'll
gone blank.
We'll put the right names in afterwards, unless anyone else who's watched the program can sort of add it in the comments. So like my first there you go.
ADHD Direct. There you go. Should have known that. Sports Direct. Yeah, ADHD Direct.
You get a big
pop-up
fuck
shops.
off mug when you get your pills.
Yeah. I'm an ADHDer.
So my first impression of the documentary, or the show, was that it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be, because a lot of the stuff he was saying is actually kind of on point. Yeah, there's a massive wait, and it's great that there's people have an avenue to be seen, and if there are people being misdiagnosed and potentially given sort of powerful medication inappropriately, like if they don't actually have ADHD, those drugs could do more harm than good. So all of these are really, really valid points. So my first impression was that it wasn't as bad as I thought it might be. But the more I thought about it and the more we spoke, we realized that there's another side to this. So what was your first impression?
I think my first impression, I mean, I was shocked at the footage I saw, and I braced myself for it, and I was shocked at it, and I had to kind of take a step back and go, context here. We're looking at 8 to 12 seconds of what was stated to have been a 60-minute meeting. But I didn't recognise what I was seeing in relation to my experience from being a private patient. But what I felt, and I can only go on me, I felt an unsettled and an unnerving around the idea that the picture was going to be painted broadly around private diagnoses rather than individual experience, individual circumstance. And that was my initial thought. I felt, I know where this
because
is going.
The title of the show and the literature before it kind of implies that all private bodies aren't doing the work, and we know that that's not the case. So one of the organizations that featured in the Panorama thing is actually a service that the NHS refer to. So ADHD, I can't remember which one it was, but And in fairness, two of the companies that the journalist spoke to did go into a lot more depth than the first, but that's not to say that there weren't sort of issues.
And I think with that, they, based on what we saw, they went into a lot more depth. I think that's where I struggle with. Like with me, and it's just the way I am.
Mm.
I need to see a bigger picture, and when I can't, my brain
Yeah,
automatically fills in
yeah,
the other side of the picture, and it's
yeah,
not always going to be the truth. But when I haven't got the option to kind of make an informed decision, my brain just fills in the
yeah,
gaps and sometimes catastrophizes it as well. So it can take it from
yeah. So
reality
like
to up here.
what I will say is that the first organization came off really badly. So the
Mm.
psychologist that he spoke to in the first instance looked like she was sat in her pajamas in her bedroom. So she didn't like,
Mm.
if I'm spending that kind of money on an assessment, I want to feel like the person who's doing it is professional. I'm not saying that they've got to be in an
Yeah.
office or whatever, but it was so sort of relaxed and sort of lackadaisical that I was just like, wow, this is, as first impressions go, that's pretty poor. And
It was the whole kind of slumped. And I did say in a video, and I stand by it, ultimately, if somebody's qualified and has the academia and the
mm,
professional experience to make that judgment, it doesn't matter where it is. But I absolutely agree. It was the whole in a chair, relaxed. It did feel a little bit FaceTime to the girls on a weekend, chatting about what's gone on there, rather than something that was serious to
yeah,
the
like she
individual who
she
was
she
taking the
almost didn't seem
assessment.
present because like sometimes she was like saying stuff whilst playing with her hair and not really. She wasn't like locked in. Um,
She wasn't
yeah,
present. She wasn't
and
fully
and
present in
the
the
thing that she
situation.
definitely got wrong is the fact that she expressed an opinion as if fact, like, yeah, you definitely have, when the actual process is that it's the psychiatrist in the second appointment who's able to actually give you the definitive kind of diagnosis, and that's where
Mm,
things got
mm.
really sort of muddied with that first one.
And I think that's terminology. If she says, based on your answers, it it may be suggested that these symptoms are suggested that ADHD could be something. Therefore, I'm going to refer you forward to the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
stage, which will be more in
yeah,
depth
yeah.
and so
And
forth.
the 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 the, the,
See,
the
Joe.
journalist reported that the psychiatrist on that second appointment, it almost felt like he was trying to sort of move it on and go, yeah, you've got it. We'll sort out your prescription. So like, I totally get that that's not how it should be. And I guess your point that
Mm,
you said earlier was that that's not the experience that you had with the organization that you ended up going through. And it's, I mean, with the second organization, it seemed a bit better because they were seen by two nurses, one overseeing someone who was new, so that there seemed to be like an sort of
mhm.
a sense of more responsibility.
Uh, I think that was an hour. If I remember right, there was a 60-minute, a
Mm,
45-minute, and an hour and
yeah.
45 minute.
Um. So I guess the main thing is that whilst it wasn't as bad as I thought it could have been, the, the concern is,
How, how did you feel watching it at the time? And I'm reflecting. You've touched on it, but did it make you feel any kind of way? Did it make you feel, yeah, any kind of way? I suppose that's the question.
watching it, I honestly I was just like this seems fine. But on reflection, I felt like there's a lot that they didn't do that they should have to make it more uh, even-handed. Yeah, I mean, because like let's
Balanced.
there's a lot of chat about the BBC at the minute of not being as impartial as it once was, and this is pretty indicative of that. Um, but
Hmm.
it was put forward in a fairly one-sided way. So what they could have done is they could have taken more more time to explain the condition in a bit more depth. You can't really summarize ADHD in a really quick way because it affects different people in different ways. Some people have a hyperactive type, some people have the inattentive type, some people have a combined, and some people will have ADHD that coexists on top of another condition.
And I think we spoke before. I think, like for me, I had no clue I could have had ADHD, and then I found information about it. And going into an assessment, I was thinking I was inattentive, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you were diagnosed inattentive. Is that right, Mike? Yeah. So I was going in, and I was anticipating a diagnosis of inattentive, and was quite shocked when they said to me, based on all this information, either side scored out a 9 on a marker symptom. So there's 18 collective symptoms, 9 on each kind of inattentive and impulsivity. I wasn't anticipating the impulsivity because in my head, that's the naughty kid.
Yeah.
It's the naughty kid in the classroom. It's the one that's kicking off doing them things. And that isn't the case, but that was in my head. So when they told me that, the person that I saw had to talk me through, and he did, to be fair to him, he talked me through how things I'd identified sat into each of the symptoms to help me to understand how it got to the diagnosis.
So I feel that they could have taken a lot more care to explain the condition more, and all of the sort of sub issues that you can get off the back of having ADHD, because it's not just the ADHD. There's all these other problems that come off the back of it. So you could have like a skin picking or a hair pulling sort of compulsion. You could have you could be prone to like real low spells of depression, which can come off the back of comparing yourself to all the sort of typical people, going, why?
And that it's that feeling of never feeling like, and I think I always felt like I never said outwardly, but I never quite felt like I could. It'd be like you're in a race and you've trained exactly the same, but you're just looking at somebody that's 100 meters ahead of you, thinking, I've put more into this than you. Why are you so far ahead? But no one ever told you what their training plan was, or why they were there, or in fact why you were behind.
What is it? Comparison's the thief of joy or whatever. But like you're constantly going, why can't I just do what they do? Like it's.
But internally, I found, rather than being able to voice it for
people,
a lot of years.
People can get bouts of depression, but it's not actually depression that they have. They can have anxiety. They can have the sort of the compulsive behavior. The impulsivity can lead to like compulsive spending, and
rumination and OCD for me was a massive crossover, and it was OCD that led to me discovering the reality of ADHD as opposed to the outwardly seen version of. That was the gateway. It was almost like OCD was the gateway, and then ADHD became the missing puzzle.
ADHD sits in the same sort of banding as other under neurodivergence. So that's Asperger's and autism. So as such, ADHD is also kind of on a spectrum. And this Panorama episode was painting things in a very black and white kind of perspective, but the reality is that it's not this or that. It's like so many shades of grey. Now, I didn't want to come on here and just sort of
50 shades of grey, maybe.
I didn't want to come on here and like vilify like the BBC, because like a lot of the stuff they were saying is right, but that doesn't make the other people in this discussion wrong. It's more complex than that. So they could have done way more to explain the impact of the condition. And if I'm honest, if they really wanted to be more thorough, they probably should have sent more people to each organization, and then
more people
got a feel for, was it consistently bad, or
And all, go on,
or
sorry,
did somebody
consistently
get
bad.
a slightly better, more in-depth service because they saw different people from that organization, or was the standard consistent? And then you might respect the thing more. And it also didn't take any time to talk about the private sector organizations that are doing the work.
That and that for me is huge. I think, do you know, like you watch soaps, and this might be a tangent, but there's context to where I'm going. You watch a soap that covers sensitive storylines, and at the end of it, there's a disclaimer in which they say, if anybody is triggered or impacted by what they've seen in this show, please go on. Da, 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 da. I watched the Panorama one back earlier because I thought I'm going to look if there's anything, and there wasn't. And I was like, so I've left that with a message that private diagnosis for ADHD are ultimately incorrect, whereas I know through my experience, the service I had through a private company, and I'm happy to say that, I don't know if it's right, but my pace, they really gave me a thorough, robust, intrusive is the only way I can describe it. But when you look at what they're trying to establish, it's got to go there. And I had that. And what I felt sorry for is anybody that was in the position that I was 4 months ago, where I just, no, 6 months ago even, where are we, May? 7 months ago, by the by, last year, anyone that was in the position I was, if I had seen that program back last year when I was starting to explore this, it would have totally blocked off the opportunity for me to seek private assessment, because it painted a picture. Whereas had it have said, however, we had members go out and explore X, Y, and Z, and these were services where we felt their processes were in line with what it should be, then it gives the negative but also a solution. It was very ambiguous and grey at the end of the show, and it was like, well, what do I do now? And that's prominently like something we think all the time. What next? What do I do? How do I handle
I
this?
mean, when you think about the fact that fucking Hollyoaks will put a message on the end of a soap opera saying, if you were affected by any of these issues, here are numbers you can call. Like,
even more so, EastEnders. Like, if we strip it back to the BBC, EastEnders do it.
Was more responsible in handling a sensitive issue than one of the more respected news programs. Yeah, I think like they could have done more. Basically, it's impossible to sort of summarize the ADHD community and the assessment process effectively in a 30-minute program. I feel like the journalist already had his mind made up in terms of like how this was going to go, and I'm not saying he's wrong, because on one hand, like, people are having to spend an awful lot of money with these organizations to get answers, and it shouldn't be the case. And if people are taking advantage of the situation and just capitalizing it and just taking that money, like, what was it, £900 for your consultation, like over 100.
It was the gold membership thing that I struggled with the context of a service that were offering bronze, silver, and gold memberships, and it might just be my perception of, I was just like, wow, it's like signing up to a club. It's like when you join a gym and they go, but you can't leave,
and you have to pay for like top-up assessments and like.
Yeah, but if you want to go to spin class, you've got to pay an extra £7. But you're a member of the gym. But if you want to, and it's we've just had a comment. So I think it comes to trying to get funding. Right to Choose has come about through awareness through programs. Yeah, in a broader perspective, maybe Right to Choose is here because programs have shone a light on issues around services and access to services.
And maybe some more progress comes off the back of this whole Panorama thing, and maybe the BBC get taken to task about doing their job better. Like, you know, it's sometimes stuff like this happens, and it's not great, it's not ideal, and sometimes it stimulates the conversation that will sort of push things forward. And if that's what happens, then I'm all about it. But let's talk about like worst fears and like concerns about the immediate impact of the program. So what's your biggest worry about this?
My biggest worry, and I mentioned this to you earlier and on a video, is I know how vulnerable I felt at a time where I was just entering this world that's now around me, kind of thing. And I'm a massive empath in respect that I really get consumed by how other people may be impacted by something, and I don't often vocalize it, probably don't even know the people, but I can get consumed by it. And my biggest worry is in my head, I see somebody in a headspace where I was at the point I started my journey to ADHD, not feeling like the pathway I took is valid, relevant, or even available to them. That's my biggest fear, because the only other way potentially is going to be a very negative spiral if they can't access knowledge and support that is imperative to those individuals moving forward.
So it's probably worth mentioning, actually, and I checked online, sort of looking at some of the sort of commentary about the show, and so there's a point in the episode where they talk to this lady who had been seen by Harley Street, and the guy said, "Look, you know, I've been to Harley Street and they told me that I had it, but I've also seen."
Did you see how she responded?
Properly deflated, because she said, "But I've also been seen by someone at the NHS, and they've confirmed that I don't have it." And I need to tell you this: it was a 3-hour session, so instantly she's been told that this whatever support she was given was paled in comparison to what he got, but what he got is not the standard experience. So for one,
you put on the show, didn't you? If the NHS have got a camera in front of them, they are going by the book. And we all know the pressures and stresses that are faced. And it may be that actually in some cases it's not as thorough, in other cases it may be, but you're always going to see textbook when it's through a program.
It's not even
day to day,
textbook, dude. Right? So one, he's effectively jumped the queue. So we've started the show talking about.
I did think that. I watched it. I was like, who does he know that he's just walked in there and seen a person?
People are having to wait far too long to see specialists so they can get the care that they need. Yeah. And somehow, because it's the BBC, he gets to have a conversation with a specialist and talks to them for 3 hours. Nobody gets a 3-hour appointment on their first meeting with a psychiatrist.
And when I watched it, in my head, I thought, whose appointments he nicked?
No, actually, which 3 people have gone without because he's monopolized that guy's time for 3 hours. That's 3 people, because generally your first appointment is going to be 45 minutes to an hour if you're lucky, right? So that side of it, the more I thought about it, and when I read a comment online, I was actually, that's actually really fucking out of order. So he's just, I mean, if you didn't see it, this girl, when he delivers this news to that girl, she's crying, she's upset, she's like,
she goes from feeling like she had made peace with who she was to like that was taken away from her, and that is a visual perception from me. She didn't articulate that, but you could just see
cried,
her
and then she was like, I wanted to go through
Yeah,
the NHS. Like I wanted that, but she wouldn't have
yeah,
got a 3 hour
yeah,
appointment, right? So that little moment of like dramatic disappointment is really irresponsibly created by that journalist and the BBC. Like, the title of the show is kind of clickbaity for starters. The experience that he had on the NHS is not typical.
but did you see they changed the bio of the show? So the initial, not bio, it's the wrong word. What do you call it?
Right.
When they put something in the TV guide online, they changed that within 4 days of when they released it, because the text that was used, and I've got copies of it, I'll send it over to you on WhatsApp. It was suggestive. It was acquisitional, if that's a word. But Joe, it was making accusations. It was being suggestive, and they changed it, and it was only ever so slightly. But it's amazing how the slight change of words changed it from an attack to a kind of perception. It was weird. Like the first one I was like, arms up, let's go. You're coming at me here.
Yeah.
Secondly,
So
it changed slightly.
the one of the big risks is that anyone who's seen those three organizations potentially now feels that their diagnosis isn't valid, and a big part of like
Mm-hmm.
ADHD is imposter syndrome and rejection sensitivity. So you're potentially making people feel that they're not going to be taken seriously, or maybe questioning whether they've actually got.
My, I'm gonna leave you talking for 20 seconds. I just need to sort
Okay,
something. I'm back
so
in like 20 seconds.
on one side, it's there's a whole mass of people who've been seen who's been seen by these organizations who might suddenly be questioning whether they have the condition at all, and a lot of those people will be perfectly valid diagnosis that they legitimately have the issue. So that's a lot of distress to cause by some irresponsible reporting and framing the whole show in a certain way. But the thing I mentioned to Paul earlier today, like my big concern, is that, and I touched on this earlier, is like you can have some horrific low points because of ADHD, like bouts of horrific depression, and you might even feel like it's not depression that you have. You might, like, if you've not been diagnosed, you might not understand why you're feeling that way. But let's say someone is in that space where they're waiting to be diagnosed. They're trying to get the support they need, but they're waiting, so they're feeling despondent because they've been waiting a really long time, and they're in one of these low periods, and it would be terrible if the impact that this episode has is that it pushed someone over the edge to the point where they would consider causing themselves some kind of harm. That's like my worst fear in this whole thing.
And that's the. I'm back, by the way. Hi. Cheers for running with that one, bro. But yeah, like that's there's a lot of kind of people who experience what you've just said, where they feel like they want to harm themselves, and it's especially when they can't see a solution, they can't see a point of call where they can address it, talk through it, or get anything done. And that's really concerning for somebody. I'm open. Like I've had suicide ideology before at different points, and I was very, very lucky because through work I had an opportunity to speak to somebody through a health package which linked to my work, and I am blessed and fortunate to have that gateway and that opportunity. Had I have had to wait for normal services, it's not even worth thinking about where I could have been or where my mindset could have been at the point it was available to
Yeah.
me. It's scary
So
to even think about.
that's the worst case scenario. Like if someone sees that and they feel more lost than they were in the first place, like that would be
Mm.
a terrible thing. Um, and they it, it wouldn't have been that hard to have a more objective, more kind of even-handed sort of perspective on the whole thing. The I think it's the ADHD Foundation posted their response and a number of sort of key sort of takeaways. Like they reached out to the BBC and the Panorama team when they found out that this was coming out to see if they could offer any kind of input and support, and the BBC waited until the 12th of this month to respond. Didn't engage, so they've not actually engaged with any of like the sort of governing bodies or the foundations or the sort of verified organizations, charities, what have you.
Well, you've got the adult ADHD pod and charity that is prominent, and that was my first introduction to ADHD. It was through the podcast, through to psychiatrists, psychologists. I always get them mixed up, but fundamentally people who are well in the know who are ADHD. And there's so many out there who you could just go, could you give your perception of this so we can make sure it meets in the middle between impact on there and intent going out? Well, if they'd have gone out, and this is something I'll put to you, and if they'd have gone out and put out a program in which an individual that had ADHD saw 4 different places and got a positive diagnosis because they had ADHD, it wouldn't have been a program, would it? It would have been Sam Thompson on Channel 4, which was a program that I did enjoy watching, but it wouldn't have been clickbait. It wouldn't have the gravitas or the anchor to draw people into it. It had to find something wrong and negative, of which some of the practices and issues were, but it's just sad that it can't be something that let's inform, let's give directive, and let's help people to move forward. It feels like it set people back.
So it was an opportunity to like increase awareness and maybe sort of correct some misconceptions that are out there on both sides, like because they say there's a lot of people that talk about ADHD on social media, and they do make kind of very general, kind of almost amusing kind of posts about it. You know,
I said something on a post and you picked me up on it, which I was glad you did, because it was something where my intent was not how you received it, and I think that's so important in messages. And the fact that we're friends and you were able to go, I received what you said in this way, and I was able to go, oh man, let's reflect on it. That wasn't my intention. That's why I fully value your friendship, because we can be honest, we can be open, we can share experience, we can talk and kind of direct each other in ways from the same similar headspaces. But who's holding BBC accountable for potentially the damaging things that they didn't intend to say, kind of thing?
Yeah, massive missed opportunity. Because they could have set things straight, and that's not to say a lot of things they said were inaccurate. Like I said, they were right about a lot of it, but it was but it was dressed in a very one-sided way.
It's a bit ignorant of us to ignore that as well, because it'd be very easy to come on and just wave a flag and become an army, but actually, without being subjective and looking at it literally and seeing positives and negatives, it just becomes an all-out war. Whereas actually, what's important to both of us is integrity, honesty, and openness around the matter.
They ultimately, you know, they said some very sort of true things. You know, if there are people who aren't doing due diligence and taking the time to assess people properly, they need to be called out and held to account. Maybe that highlights that people need to be audited more regularly. Maybe there's like a minimum amount of time that clinicians have to spend engaging with people before a final diagnosis can be given. So it raises those kinds of questions, and in that regard, they're absolutely right. But the way they've sort of framed it and painted the picture is potentially really damaging. So, yeah, I mean, like we've been talking about doing something around the ADHD community for a while, and we're still working on that.
Yeah, we're throwing out creative ideas, and hopefully some will stick, and then we're
Yeah,
able to
but
kind of bring that together.
this was too big a thing to sort of not discuss, in the moment. Um, I've not watched the Sam Thompson thing, so I
I
might
think,
watch that this week, and then we can maybe talk about that another time.
yeah, yeah, and that'd be good because I think for the Sam Thompson thing, and from my part, um, a lot of similarities resonated. So for me, and I know that's not the case because I've seen stuff online where people
Yeah,
didn't resonate with it. But for me personally, I really resonated with it. I felt like we had shared experiences in different contexts and situations, but similar kind of feelings and emotions. And for me,
yeah,
evoked real
and that highlights a
emotion.
massive difference
I
between one piece of media and the Panorama thing. Like you,
mm,
you related to what he was going through, and you felt validated by the fact he was putting it out there. And
mm. And in the show, sorry, Mike, to cut you, in the show, he started taking Elvance. The drug that was prescribed was Elvance, and I'm I may be wrong. He took it once or twice, no more. And the impact it had on him personally, he didn't like it. But within the show, he was talking to groups of people who are all ADHDers, of which some had positive experience, some it didn't work. And for him, he was yet to make his mind up. And I just looked and I just thought, a true reflection. It's not going to solve everybody's problems, but actually, what's positive is I think, I was listening to that ADHD 2.0
yeah,
thing, which is a book we and you spoke about a lot. And I think they said something between 70 and 80% of people, it can have
hmm
some form of positive impact. 20%, it can either do
yeah,
nothing or it can have a negative. Um, but watching that show with Sam Thompson, and I'll let you watch it, then we'll come back and we'll powwow over it again. But I felt informed. I felt like I left it with information that I didn't have before that could enable me to make an informed decision rather than feeling like I had a door slammed shut on me.
yeah,
And I think that's how I felt with
yeah, and
Panorama. It was a bit like,
that's a more honest appraisal of what the situation is. Like so some people respond better to the more overt sort of amphetamine based stimulants, where it actually gives you a bit more of a proper a proper spike. I'm on Elvance, and it's
hmm,
been life changing. Like the difference is night and day. And the one of the positives of Elvance is that you get maybe less withdrawal symptoms when you come off it. You can actually take days off it, and as long as you're not required to do like any sort of mental heavy lifting, you're for the most part fine.
and I think what I've realised, you told me about you being on Elvance, and my initial response was like,
Mm.
sign me up, let's give me some. But this was 2 months ago before formal diagnosis has happened. But then now I'm looking and I'm going, do you know what? I'm meeting so many different people who have had negative experience of Elvance, but positive experience with other ones. And it's really kind of grounded me in a sense that this isn't my decision, it's my body's. And however my body will respond to a medication will inform what's right for me, what's wrong for me,
Yeah,
what doesn't fit me, what does fit me. It's not a decision that's it to me. Ultimately, the decision's already made here, and I've just got to work out what the answer is through
yeah,
titration, which is what you go through when you're kind of
yeah. It's
entering the world of medication.
it was an interesting show, and it's provoked a lot of sort of conversations. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. I think we're looking at weeks of
Mm.
discussion about this. And it'd be interesting to see if the BBC or the journalist in question actually sort of respond to anyone. But it was, I think it's useful to discuss it, and if you know, if the few people that have watched
Mm.
this are intrigued or um, you know, have contributed to, like, I know we've had a bunch of comments. I've not been able to read all of them. You know, we'll maybe do this again further down the line to talk about other stuff.
Yeah, and I think so. To bring this to a close, then 3 questions. What did you take anything positive from the program? What do you wish the program would have done? And if say someone from the BBC was watching this, making another documentary, what advice would you give them? And what would you say to people who are seeking private diagnosis now?
I think if there's any positive, it's that you can take matters into your own hands and go and get support. You don't have to wait for the NHS. There's maybe you know, maybe people didn't realise that was an option. I wish that they'd gone into more depth about the condition itself. I wish they'd mentioned about shared care agreements and the instances where you can actually be passed back to the NHS, because there are third parties that will do that. Psychiatry UK is one of them. So they enter into like a shared care partnership, and once assessment, diagnosis and titration is done, you can be passed back to the NHS so that they can carry on with your prescriptions, which means it's more affordable.
And you still have your check-ins with your private, because what they don't do is take accountability for the diagnosis of the person you saw, but they will accept their diagnosis and support you with shared care from a medication point of view.
So some private people don't have those agreements in place, so that you can't be handed back. If you attempted to, the NHS wouldn't accept the diagnosis. So in those instances, those people are bound to those private organisations and paying, you know, inflated prices for the, you know, for the continual care and for the medication. You know, anywhere between 60 and £100 plus for their medication. I pay £9 something, right? So they didn't talk about any of that. So, you know, it's raised awareness. There's a positive. It's provoked a lot of conversation. There's potentially a positive change, or people's minds may be, or their perceptions might be changed off the back of it, positively or negatively. But ultimately, they should have done more. So, like, if they were going to do another show, it would need to be longer. They would need to go in more depth, and they need to take more care about how they talk about people.
Do you know what I think would be? I don't even want to use the word positive, because until it happens, you never know. But do you know the question time setup? That kind of having representatives for, against, and very in the middle, where it's an open discussion from experience, understanding, professional, personal. That setting which enables that authentic conversation. What I felt the documentary did was it reared a lot of questions in me that I don't have anyone to get the answers from, and it left me feeling a little bit like, what if? Very shaded, middle ground.
That would have been actually fucking perfect. Like if a 30-minute show followed by some sort of town hall type affair, half an hour of discussion that poked holes in it and answered questions, that would have been way more even-handed. But that's not what we got. So it's a shame. Yeah. So, but look, man, I've enjoyed this. But I'll watch the Sam Thompson doc this week, and then we'll maybe schedule another one of these, and maybe we'll invite other people to rewatch the Sam Thompson thing and come on and watch the chat and sort of interact and sort of let us know what they think. Okay, so last thing before we sort of sign off, when we post about the conversation, if we reshare this video, we'll tag on organizations, their Instagram accounts. So like if you're affected by any of the subject matter that we've discussed this evening and you need support,
I'm going to put the Hollyoaks theme tune on.
But this is something the BBC didn't do. So like,
it's important. I jest because that's just my way. It's so important.
ADHD forums, on Facebook that we can sort of point you towards. You can contact people like CAM, the Campaign Against Living Miserably, who are a great organisation that support people with their mental health. You can talk to the Samaritans. So if you are waiting diagnosis, if you feel a bit disenfranchised or down off the back of this whole thing, you know, don't suffer in silence. Talk to someone.
And going on what you've just said about Samaritans there, Samaritans aren't just somebody that's going to fetch you off a bridge. And I know that's a very bold statement, but for me individually, it was like that end of the road thing. They are preventative, they are supportive, they are somebody that can offer guidance. And I mentioned the service at work that I got at a time when I couldn't access that due to how busy it was. I reached out to the Samaritans, and they were wonderful. They were fantastic, and it wasn't an end of the road situation. It was I was in turmoil. I was really struggling, and I didn't know how to handle the emotions I was feeling.
Yeah,
and
so
they were phenomenal.
They're just there to listen. So if you feel sort of disheartened off the back of the Panorama thing, or if you are still waiting for your assessment and your diagnosis and you feel low about it, then reach out and talk to someone. They're just there to listen, and just getting shit off your chest can do the world of good. But we'll have another one of these chats at some point soon. I'm sorry I was late. I'm sorry I didn't update the app, but I think we got there.
We've got there in the end, mate, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And I'll probably talk to you in a minute because I'll drop you a message. See you in a bit.